They say in life, you're not supposed to talk about money, politics, or religion in mixed company. Now, I've never been one to really listen to what the all-powerful they say, but I'll be honest, that's some pretty sound advice. But in the interest of ignoring sound advice, let's talk about something transgressive. Religion. Well, I say religion, but it's not really religion. It's more about religious figures. Okay, I say figures, but it's really about one figure in particular. The Pope. The leader of the Catholic Church. The Vicar of Christ. The very word Pope comes from the Latin term papa, which is taken from Greek papas, meaning father. So, of course, you have to trust him. And you just learned some Latin and Greek, so you get that as a bonus as well. But to give you a little time frame of reference and a little understanding as to what we're going to get into. In 2,000 years, there have been 260 popes, starting, of course, with St. Peter. It's a bit of an exclusive club. I mean, think about it. Out of 7 billion people on Earth right now, there's one pope. But leave it to the Catholic Church, because if it's already an exclusive club, they can make it even more exclusive. Out of 260 popes, 82 have been sainted. Now, the system with which they elect popes that we're familiar with has been in place for 2,000 years. Actually, a little longer. But see, today, when we hear the Pope, we think about an old white guy dressed in impressive robes, riding in a silly car, traveling the world, giving spiritual counsel to leaders. Men who control everything, all the money, machines of war, and everything in between, clamor to meet him. They bow in his presence, and they hold him with great reverence. I mean, he's the voice of Christ, for the love of God, so of course they do. And most of us think of a sweet old man, seems nice enough, without really thinking about the vast power he controls. Or the fact that he's the leader of a country. Yeah, those pictures you see of Vatican City, dripping with gold, that's in the middle of Rome, in the middle of Italy, that's a country. And it's only half a square mile. But to think of all that, we're forgetting possibly the most important part. To some people, he is the literal representation of Jesus Christ on earth. But he's still a man. And while he heads the most powerful church, controls possibly the most money, we all see him as a sweet, kind, peaceful old man. Not intimidating at all, and really of no consequence to our daily lives. But that wasn't always the case. There was a time when popes commanded legions of warriors, and they started wars. The Knights Templar that you hear so much about, that are behind every conspiracy possible. Yeah, those guys, their allegiance was to the Pope. Just think of them as like the Pope's personal Navy SEALs that are also the largest bank on the planet. Because that's what they were. I mean, to the point that Pope Innocent II Yeah, I know. I trust him too. With a name like that, how can you not? Passed an order that the Knights Templar were exempt from all local laws and travel. I mean, just imagine that. It's like the Pope's personal SEAL team that comes from Wells Fargo with a license to kill. And one more thing about the Knights before we jump off. And this is important just to illustrate what kind of power popes had over the years. The ultimate downfall of the Templars came from King Philip IV from France. He's fighting a war with Italy, or with England. And to fight a war, you have to have money. And guess who he goes to for money? The Templars. Now, war's expensive. And he runs up a massive debt. He knows he can't pay it. So on Friday the 13th, 1307, yeah, this is where Friday the 13th comes from. Philip orders that the knights are rounded up, arrested, and prosecuted. And they were. But why? Because the Pope allowed it. You see, Philip had been in talks with the Pope to tell him, like, they're too powerful. We need to do something. I'm going to do something about it. And the Pope allowed it to happen. Like, I really need you to wrap your head around how powerful popes were at this time. I mean, the Pope's word meant everything. It carried so much weight that he even told kings what to do. I'm not talking about advising or his opinion on things. They didn't call him up and ask him, what he thought about the latest episode of a TV show. No, all the way down to permission to, I don't know, get an annulment. That's what King Henry asked for and was told no. And instead of just doing it anyway, he reformed the entire religious system of England and tore down everything that had anything to do with the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. All because the Pope told him no. It's crazy. But the one thing that history has proven time and again is that power corrupts. And just like the old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you're the voice of God speaking to the world, or believed to be the official representative of Jesus Christ, that's about as high up the absolute power tree as you can get. So over the next couple episodes, we're going to take a look at the bad popes. And trust me, there were some bad ones. One of which is so bad, his story is so crazy, I'm saving it for the very end. But let's begin with this Pope. We're going to start with Pope John XII. He was also known as Pope John XII of Alexandria, and he was Pope from 955 to 964. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of historical dates and details of his life. You don't care what he ate for lunch on his 12th birthday, and neither do I. So I'm going to attempt to keep that stuff minimum. But with that said, there is some information that's vital to understanding who this man was and maybe why he did the things he did. So, Pope John XII, a.k.a. Pope John XII of Alexandria, a.k.a. John XII, was born between 930 and 937 as Octavian. Now, you're wondering why I gave you 2 years. Because right off the bat, he's born to scandal. You see, Octavian was born to the Counts of Tusculum. So just think like the Kardashians. So he's born to the Kardashians, and his father is kind of like the self-proclaimed Prince of Rome at the time. And his family had been influencing the politics of picking the Pope for over 50 years. So basically, longer than Marky Mark's been feeling vibrations that were good like sun-kissed, this family had a hand in deciding who the Pope was. And as I said, Octavian is born into scandal. And here's how. As the Kardashians are Instagram influencing the vote for Pope for all these years, Octavian is born. And his father is Albert II. Now, Albert thinks of himself as the Prince of Rome. And for all intents and purposes, he actually is. Because Octavian's mother is believed to be Alda of Vienna. Alda, ironically enough, is Albert's stepsister. Yeah, you heard that right. His mom is the stepsister of his father. But she also happens to be the daughter of the King of Rome. So, thus the self-appointed prince thing. Now, aside from the incest, which, I mean, come on. What's a scandal without a little incest? Incest sells. So, aside from the whole Jaime and Cersei Lannister thing, everything seems to be on the up and up. Until the paparazzi show up. Okay, one paparazzi in particular. His name was Benedict. Benedict writes that Octavian is actually the son of a concubine. But when Benedict writes this, he writes it in Latin. And apparently his Latin skills are on par with like those people that write the "I'm a rich prince and send me some money" scams. Because when he writes it clear enough to make the accusation, but not clear enough for anybody to really hold him to the fire for it. See, even then, people were careful about what they said. So, depending on who you believe, Octavian is either born in 937 to Alda or 930 to a concubine, which is why they hid it for so long. And I know, this seems like a bunch of filler with a bunch of names, but I assure you all this comes into play later, which is why I'm telling it to you now. Now, his name being Octavian should tell you something. It's a clear reference to Caesar. It tells you exactly how his family saw themselves and what role he was supposed to play. And they weren't far off. As Octavian grows older, he enters the church, because at that time, the church was the ultimate power. It's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And the church made all the rules. So at some point, Octavian enters the church and begins his rise. And everything seems to be going fine. But in 954, Octavian's father's health begins to decline. And Albert calls a meeting with all the movers and shakers of Rome. Everybody. All the noble families, the top members of the church, Joey Two Shoes from on the block that knows the guy, even the guy that Joey Two Shoes knows. Albert calls the meeting and he lays out that he's dying. And he has one dying wish. And the dying wish is the next vacancy that comes up for the Pope. He wants them to put his son in. That's all. And they agreed. But see, here's the problem. When his father dies in 954, and Octavian becomes the new prince, he's only 17. And as a prince, that would be fine. That wouldn't be too terrible. But the problem is, in November the very next year, the Pope dies. And Joey and the boys do exactly as they promised. And they elect him Pope. No opposition. No one objects. They do exactly as they told his father they would. So Octavian, at 18, is now the Prince of Rome and the Pope. Talk about absolute power. So as Pope, Octavian starts out, and he does something that to us would seem normal, but at the time was scandalous, because it had only been done 2 other times. Octavian took a regnal name. Now what that means is, instead of using your own name or coming up with a new name, you take the name of a sainted pope before you. And he takes John XII. Now, again, before he did this, it had only been done 2 other times. And it sets the tone for something that he will use throughout his entire life. You see, Octavian can't decide which title he likes better and which life he likes to lead better. Is it better to be prince? Is it better to be pope? So he does both. When he decrees things that affect Rome, he does so as Octavian. But then if it had to do with the church and the papacy, he signs as John XII. It's literally the reverse of when you used to ask your mom to go outside and she would tell you no, so you would go ask your dad and he would tell you yeah. It's that, but backwards. But he struggles. At 18, he really struggles with which lifestyle he likes better. Being prince is more fun, but being pope is more powerful. And at the time, he's 18. He's got more wealth than anybody. He has a strong allegiance and some power. Women are throwing themselves at him. They're even letting him grab them by the... You get it. But he's supposed to be the most moral and righteous man on the planet. And he knows this. He knows what's expected of him. But being Octavian is a lot more fun. At least it's more fun until it isn't. See, growing up, Octavian's family always had a problem with the Lombards. So, think Starks and Lannisters. So, 5 years in, and the Lombard family starts really acting up. Now, at the time, the Roman Empire was basically gone, but there was still some lands that were controlled by the papacy. And they were the papal states. And the Lombard family starts causing trouble to John XII by taking some papal states. And it becomes such an issue that John XII armors up and takes an army down to settle them. And the Lombards, seeing John show up in full armor, leading men ready for battle, the Lombards send for help. And they ask a guy named Gisulf of Salerno. Now, Gisulf shows up with a full-on army ready to fight. And John sees this. And John XII doesn't really want to fight. So he pulls back and begins negotiations. And he cuts a deal. He'll give them a certain city, and they'll give him the land back. And Gisulf will withdraw. John takes that deal so fast. But see, the more important thing here is that interaction taught him something. You see, Pope John XII's dad commanded the nobility. He spoke, they listened, the end. But John wasn't having the same luck. The nobility are starting to act up, and he can't seem to stop it. So he knows he's going to have to do something. Now, later that year, things really start to go south. You see, King Berengar II of Italy starts attacking papal territories. John controls Rome, but the king is far more powerful. He has all of Italy. But John's got to do something. So he knows he can't match him with might. So John sends an envoy to Germany. And this is in 960. All this happens in 1 year. but he desperately asked for help from the most powerful man in Europe, who has a great army and loves to fight, and it's King Otto I of Germany. And he asked him to step in. Now, King Otto loves a fight. And they had met before. So, when they had met the first time, John gave Otto the rank of patrician, meaning that whenever Otto was in Rome, I mean, you know what they say, he could do as Romans. All the way down to, he got all the luxuries of wealthy Romans, to the point that King Otto, being in Rome, could even vote. And John asks him for help. And Otto accepts. So, Otto packs up his military and heads into Italy. Berenger immediately withdraws and runs. So Otto steps it on down to Italy. And when Otto rolls 20 deep into Italy, he immediately goes to see Pope John XII. Now, in 962, when Otto arrives, he and John immediately meet and go into a room, and there's a discussion. It's the literal room where it happens. See, I even got a Hamilton reference in there. I'm killing it. So, when they come out of this meeting, Otto comes out and swears his oath to defend the Pope. But not just that. He also promises he's not going to just protect the Pope, he's going to protect the Papal States. And any land that he conquers that at one time was a Papal State, he's going to give back. And he would never do anything to affect the Pope or the Roman people. But this is the most important thing that Otto says. He says that once he deposes King Berenger of Italy, he's going to put somebody on the throne of Italy that will swear to do the same things. And in return for this, Pope John bestows on him the status of emperor. And just like that, the Holy Roman Empire is started. Now, the Pope, when he does this, swears an oath to Otto that he and the Roman people will always be faithful. And I want you to remember that. That's very important. Always be faithful. Now, keep something in mind here. As all this is going on, he's still being Octavian on the side. And man, is what he's doing being written about left and right. Bishops, cardinals. He's got paparazzi everywhere. And they talk about everything he does. And it's things simple as like not crossing himself when he prays. He's not taking communion, which at the time were major deals. The Catholic Church is a very ritualistic place, and these things are in place for a reason, and you do them, and it's a respect thing, but it's also more than that. And he's not doing them. And he is, I'm trying to think of how to say this. He's also doing some more stuff that's a little worse on the side, such as he's ordaining bishops in horse stables. But worse than that, he's being paid to ordain bishops in a horse stable. Going so far as to possibly at one point ordaining a 10-year-old boy as bishop. Now, most people would refer to his home as a brothel. And by most people, I say cardinals and bishops, because these are the people that are really concerned about all this. Because it turns out that Pope John XII prefers the life of Octavian, a prince. And in their writings, the most moral man in the world is listed as coarse and immoral. He lives in a morally corrupt brothel, and he's a disgrace to Rome. Yeah, and this is the Pope. This is the person that is supposed to be the physical representation of Christ, the moral compass for all of humanity. And he's thought of as an immoral playboy who lived in a brothel, rebuked tradition and ritual, and was selling prominent positions out the back of a horse stable to anyone who could afford it. Now, as with all things, word gets around. And word finally got around to Emperor Otto. The word isn't good, and the allegations are worse. You see, as John's trying to keep his deeds separate, it's starting to break down. He has political enemies that are definitely using the information to make his reputation bad. He's also blurring the lines of which is which. And the political enemies are using this to try to justify why he needs to go. So when Otto hears all this, he gets the full readout. And he hears about all of this stuff as well as cardinals talking about John fornicating with 2 widows. He slept with one of his father's concubines, as well as his own niece. Again, told you, incest sells. He hunted publicly, which the Pope was never supposed to do, because as a representative of Jesus, he was supposed to love all things. So to go out and kill God's creatures is an affront to God. Then they get into the more violent, let's say, tendencies, because they tell Otto about how Pope John gets angry. He gets angry at his confessor, which is the priest that the Pope confesses to, because even the Pope has to do confessional. And in a fit of rage, he blinds his confessor. And his confessor soon dies. In another moment of rage, he kills a cardinal subdeacon named John. But Octavian being Octavian, he only kills John after he castrates him. To prove a point. He was known to set fires, which doesn't seem big to us, but if we think about the time, it was dangerous to set fires at random because cities didn't have fire departments and hydrants, and the buildings weren't made of, flame retardant materials. If a fire got started, it could break out and level a city. And so he was known to just set fires at random. He liked to put on armor and carry a sword, something that, again, the Pope would never do. And then we get into my favorite of his habits. See, many of them report to Otto that they hear him toasting the devil while drinking wine, because he's a fan of wine. Like, think about that. This Sunday when you're sitting at church, imagine your preacher busting out a bottle of Merlot, guzzling half of it, raising a glass to the devil before pouring some out, because, his homie Lucifer and Benedict and the castrated John can't be here today, but he misses them dudes. Yeah, imagine it. He also loved to gamble and play dice. And apparently, when he was trying to break them off with the 7-Eleven, he would invoke Jupiter, Venus, other demons, other gods, and of course Satan. And that one I truly love, because when I think of that, I think of him dressed up as Ice Cube from the Good Day video. and just rolling in and throwing some 7-Elevens. And there's also this sidebar I want to throw in here for a minute. See, there's a legend in the Catholic Church of a Pope John. And this is where it comes from. You see, the legend goes that there was a mistress of a pope who had so much influence on the pope that she ran Rome and the church herself. And of course, the basis of that is Mr. Pope John Paul XII, who in fact had a mistress named Joan, and apparently she put it on him in a way that she was clearly his favorite. So it's easy to deduce she was probably running the show at some point. And see, while you and I find a lot of the playing dice and swearing to Satan and all that, we may find all that funny. But you know who didn't find it funny? Emperor Otto. But we'll get back to that. Now, when we left Otto, he had sworn allegiance to John, and he had sworn to put someone on the throne of Italy that would do the same. The nagging detail in that, though, is that Berenger II is still the king of Italy. And he starts dismantling papal states while Otto's in Rome. So Berenger puts everything together, or Otto puts everything together to leave Rome to go handle this situation with Berenger. And on the way out, he tells Pope John he should give the stuff up and live a life of humility and service more. Act like the Pope. John, of course, takes the suggestion in, ponders his life, and does exactly what Otto says, right? No. In fact, he goes harder. He starts drinking heavily, and he's waiting on information from the front lines of the battle. This is important to him. And he's on pins and needles. And word comes back that Otto is crushing Berenger with relative ease. So John is now hearing that the person that has sworn allegiance to him is winning the war and should soon have King Berenger taken out, and will put a new king in place that will have allegiance to John. He'll have everything. So there's John sitting with a house full of hoes and a hard on that could cut marble. And in his eyes, this is all going perfect. Everything is going to plan. Everything is going absolutely perfect. Everything's going a little too perfect. And John starts to become paranoid. He's really paranoid about the power that Otto seems to be gaining. And he starts to fear it. And rightfully so. Because if Otto were to change his mind, or break his oath, there'd be absolutely nothing John could do about it. And as we've learned in the movies, when a person becomes all-powerful and unstoppable, you build a kryptonite spear and a suit of armor, and you fight them in the ring. Unless, of course, both of your mother's name is Martha, then John and Otto would be cool. But we know that's not the case. But seriously, John starts being really concerned and paranoid about the victory after victory after victory. So John forms a plan and he sets it in motion. The best way to protect himself from Otto, to keep being able to play dice, murder people, drink insane amounts of wine, and smash every ratchet chick in Rome, is to double-cross Otto before Otto even realizes it. And that's what he's about to do. See, John sends out 2 envoys, one to the Magyars and one to the Byzantine Empire. He wants to form a league against Otto. He also arranges to enter negotiations with Berengar's son, the person that Otto is cutting apart, his son. Otto wouldn't even be in this fight had John not asked him. But John's trying to form a league against Otto. So, if all goes to plan, Otto will end the war, and he'll find himself the enemy of the Magyars, the Byzantine Empire. Berengar's son for sure is going to want a piece of him. Otto will end the war and have a mass amount of people and the Pope against him. His men will be tired. He's worn thin from weeks and months of battle. He'll be in no position to fight. So what a perfect time to do this. Otto is away and distracted by battle. On top of that, he left, and in his mind, he and Pope John are homies for life. John knows he's got to do this now. While Otto is distracted and weak, he's convinced himself that Otto has grown too powerful and he will be coming for the Pope next. John has to act now. So he sends out his 2 envoys. He sets up negotiations to start with Berengar's son. And I'll be honest, it's a strong plan. It absolutely will work. But there's one small detail. You see, John's ambassadors never make it to their destination. And why? Because Otto captured them. And when he captured them, John's men began to talk. And soon Otto is sending deputies to Rome to find out what in the hell is going on behind his back down there. And when John learned that his men were captured, he does a smart thing here. He immediately sends an envoy to Otto. And their job is to convince Otto that John was only sending envoys to these places to restructure and set up the papal court in these areas. That's all. And for a moment it seems to work. Otto is pacified. He's focused on the task at hand. He's fighting a war. He's winning a war. Otto loves to fight. And besides, this is all just one big misunderstanding, right? But the very next year, in 963, Otto gets information that most certainly isn't a misunderstanding. You see, Otto learns that Berengar's son has actually been allowed into Rome and is in discussions with Pope John, the very son of his enemy, the man he's been in battle against for over a year. His son is now allowed into Rome at the request of John XII, the very man who asked Otto to do all this to begin with. I can only imagine the rage that Otto must have felt. So at this point, Otto finishes Berengar off. He soundly defeats and imprisons King Berengar of Italy. Italy is now kingless. And Otto moves on to Rome. He wants an explanation. John knows he's going to want an explanation. And John needs to come up with something fast. But you know how sometimes when you've messed up and you've thought about every explanation possible and none of them seem good enough, so you decide to take it on the chin and just suck it up and you prepare for the fight that's going to happen because there's no reason, there's no good enough explanation for why you screwed up? Well, that's where John is. And that's basically what John does. He prepares for the fight. So as Otto arrives in Rome, he finds the city deeply divided. To a literal sense, even. Like, there's the people who support him that tipped him off and let him know that Berengar's son was in Rome. And you have the people who support the Pope. And as Otto shows up to Rome, he notices that the city looks very different. Positions are fortified and divided, and everybody is prepared for a war. So Otto sets out to go get the answers he wants. And when he shows up, he sees Otto sees John decked out in armor and prepared to fight. And when you're looking for a fight, you'll always find one. Now, at first, John does a good job. He defends the city. He beats the battle-worn army back across the Tiber River. But he also quickly decides that he could do it once, but there's no way he could defend the city. So John does the most strategic thing any man that's a prince and pope could possibly do. He gets Berengar's son and the papal treasury, and he hauls ass to Tiber. That's right. He took all the church's money and busted off to Tiber. The moral compass of the world. The vicar of Christ. Now, Otto, being a competent ruler that he is, takes the city of Rome and decides he's going to sort all this out. So he forms a council to figure out what happened and why. Now, in their research, investigation, they level a series of charges at Pope John XII, and they demand that he come back and explain himself. They want to hear from him. And John responds in the way that a self-entitled, drunken, debaucherous young adult who is prince and pope would. John responds in the way that that friend who is constantly judging everyone but says they don't judge, or that they aren't a psychologist but they then go on to misuse psychological terms that they read in a top 5 vocabulary of psychology while explaining what's wrong with everybody else. That's the way he responds. The way Pope John responds is this. He basically tells everyone on the council that anyone who tries to depose him of the papal throne, he will excommunicate. That's right. Anybody that's there in the city that I can't step foot in, if any of you decide that I'm not the Pope anymore and vote me out, I'm going to kick you out of the religion that I will no longer control. It reminds me of that moment when Saddam Hussein was captured and he popped out of the dirt hole and he hadn't had a haircut in a year and he hadn't, had his beard trimmed and his hair's all matted and nasty, and he stands up and announces himself as, I'm Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq. It reminds me of that moment. Some people have the amazing ability to disconnect from reality, and they can do it in a way that I can only dream about. But John lays down the law, and he means it. Anybody that votes to depose him from being Pope, he's going to throw out of the religion. And now that he's given his final word, he's going to go hunting for a while, so you can think about what you did. And again, Emperor Otto, being a competent ruler, handles the situation. And I haven't done a ton of research into Emperor Otto. He may have ended up being a tyrant. Like I said, I haven't done a ton. I've read some. But in the way he handles all of this, he's gained my respect, if nothing else. You see, Otto could have taken the papacy. He could have hunted John down and killed him. He could have appointed whoever he wanted to be king of Italy. He could have appointed whoever he wanted to be the Pope. King Otto at the time is now the first ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. And he's got all the machinery to do this, the machine of war. But that's not what he does. You see, Otto convenes the council, and they depose John, and they elect John's replacement, Pope Leo VIII. Now, after they do all this, Otto decides he's going to leave. He's ready to go home. And on the way out, there was a small skirmish, a little bit of a revolt in support of John. Otto apparently slaughtered a bunch of people and put that down real quick. But Otto does leave Rome, and there's a new pope. And Italy doesn't have a king. And John's off in the mountains. But of course, once John hears that Otto is gone, he comes back. This time he comes back with a lot of supporters and friends, and the company of people that are with him is large enough that Pope Leo VIII flees to the emperor for his own safety. And John completes his return in November of 964. And immediately he convenes a group of clergy members to quickly say that it wasn't canonical. He can't be removed as pope. He was still the pope. All that was BS, and he's the pope again. And he orders his enemies round up. He tortures some of them, mutilates some, kills some. He's pissed off, and he wants to make an example. And he wants everybody to know that he is not someone you cross. But he also knows that eventually he and Emperor Otto are going to have to deal with this. They're going to cross paths. So John sends a bishop to meet with Otto. He wants to see if there's any accommodations he can make to pacify Otto. He stabbed Otto in the back. He knows Otto's mad about it. And he knows that Otto has a lot of power. But ultimately, nothing comes of this. And nothing comes of this because on May 14th in 964, Pope John XII of Alexandria would die. Now, remember when I told you that Octavian was born in a sex scandal? Well, ironically, he may have died in one as well. So there are two theories on how he died. One is to internal bleeding from some unknown ailment. The second one is far more commonly accepted. It's the one that I'm going to go with. And in my research, I've seen a lot more than the first. And it's that Pope John died committing adultery. And yes, there was internal bleeding. There was also believed to be some external bleeding. You see, the common belief is that Pope John XII was killed when a jealous husband came home and caught him in bed with the man's wife. And I'll be honest, between you and me, I think that'd be the way that Octavian would want us to remember him. And in honor of him, we'll do just that. I want to thank you all for listening to the first episode of the new series, Bad Popes. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. And make sure to subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, click the like and subscribe buttons. And even the bell so you know when new episodes air. Definitely come back next week as we discuss a man who was Pope on 3 different occasions, and he may have even sold the papacy. So you certainly don't want to miss next episode. But until then, I'm David VanDyke. This has been Bad Popes. See you next week.